So this is Taylor Mason, and I'm here today with Senator Anthony Williams. This is an ongoing oral history project on the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus and its impact on members and staff. So my first question for you is, could you tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got to the House and the Senate?
Well, I'm a person I'm in the Senate, a senatorial district. I represent Philadelphia and Delaware County. And I'm a person who grew up in Southwest Philadelphia. And I entered politics primarily through two parts. One, my father was an elected person prior to me. And so that was a part of our household activities. And so as a result of him leaving his seat, he asked me to fill his seat. And of course, the influences growing up as a child affected me. The other part, though, was I wasn't pursuing public office. I was in private industry. I was actually working for corporate America, and I came back to Philadelphia, and an incident with a young child, Marcus Shades, was murdered in a community not too far from where I grew up as a kid, which affected me in ways I didn't expect. So I went back to my own neighborhood and started to discover it wasn't what it used to be. And that drew me a little bit closer to the challenges that my neighborhood was going through and the people that I grew up with. And so those two things caused me to consider running for office, and I did.
Okay. What has been your experience being a person of color in the House and Senate? Do you think there were extra hurdles in overcoming that into getting into elected office? Or so feel free to share any stories related to that.
I wouldn't say they're extra hurdles. They're just normal hurdles that if you're a person of color, African American specifically, and you grew up in this country and you know that there are people who are intolerant, will call you names, have limited points of view outside of politics, you would expect them to also be a part of the governmental structure. So I couldn't say that I involved myself with people who were extraordinarily bigoted, that there were those that were there and have been, but that didn't shock me. It didn't create any extra hurdles. It just made what my normal life was like. How do you negotiate with people who don't see the world the same way you do and sometimes don't really care about it? But you know, that's the art of politics. There's leverage, there's negotiation, there's pressure, and sometimes there's conversion of thought. But I wouldn't say it was extra. It was just something I've been accustomed to because of who I am and, you know, how I look.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. Talk about your House service first, and then we'll move into the Senate. So you represented the 191st district in the House, which was Delaware and Philadelphia counties. And this is a very historic district. As you mentioned, your father served in this district, Peter Truman, Samuel Ross, more currently, Joanna McClinton. So what's it like being in such a historic district with all these well-known members?
Well, I think that for those who want to understand why it was historic, because of what happened out of that district. It was the first district in Philadelphia, probably in the state, where an African-American was elected to office without the party endorsement, quote unquote, against the system. So this district was literally the touch point for African-Americans and people who were interested in changing the system. And that was the party machinery would select who was to represent you. Didn't matter what the district looked like. It was just the party machinery picked the person. And so that's the nature of the history behind this district, that it literally created the independent political movement, not just for Black people, for all folks, because it became a standard and organizing mechanism. How do you do it? All those things came out of this district, and it led to other people of color across Philadelphia being elected to office in a similar fashion.
Okay. And then moving to your current Senate district, also very well-known members like your father and Paul McKinney. Do you have any stories about them you'd like to share, particularly your father, or really anyone that you'd like to share?
So the district has changed significantly since my father, and certainly since Senator McKinney was there. Those are the two first African Americans that represent the district. They were primarily in Philadelphia. I think when Paul McKinney was senator, it was all Philadelphia. Since that time, it has changed dramatically. Half geographically is in Delaware County, and half is in Philadelphia. The type of folks who vote in this district are also significantly different than when Paul McKinney and then my dad was senator. So the folks who are in Delaware County are folks who've transitioned or migrated from Philadelphia out to Delaware County. The district has increased in terms of its diversity with regard to people of color and inclusion. Registration, party affiliation has dramatically changed from Republican to Democrat. And I guess viewpoints have significantly evolved based upon the people who used to live here as compared to the people who live here now. And now it's a part of another significant change. So the gentrification, to whatever extent people use that term, is a part of my district. I represent University of Penn. And so around that area is a significant transition in terms of people who have not lived here before have moved into this district. So this district has represented migration patterns, which are significant to Philadelphia and the region about how people move around.
Okay. So we mentioned some of your predecessors. What was your relationship like with them? Did they play a mentor role for you at all? Or did you play a mentor role for anyone, any of your successors?
I would certainly say that people who were before me played a mentor role. My dad.
Of course.
I knew Senator McKinney, but not necessarily in a political way. I just knew him and respected him, but I necessarily involved myself in his political organization. But my dad obviously imprinted upon my entire life. So politics was no different. Values and character and structure, fighting for people in our office, who we fought for, why we fought, are all part of the legacy of my dad, who gave me information about that and broadened my understanding, and certainly taught me the skills of how to get elected. And to a degree, I've been fortunate enough to help another generation behind me. Councilman Kenyatta Johnson, who used to be a former state representative, Councilman Jordan Harris, and Whip, and leader of the House, Jordan McClinton, Regina Young, who's a newly elected state rep, Rudy Taylor, who's a council member in Darby, are all people I've been fortunate enough to help. A few folks who've made it to the bench, Tamika Lane in particular, also worked for me, who's a judge now. So I've been fortunate enough to help other people pursue helping our communities from a position of elected office.
Yeah. Joanna McClinton, I actually interviewed her last week, and she did mention you as a big role model in her life, and your father as well. She mentioned, had your joint session last week, how it was very exciting and emotional to have both of you standing there with her being the first African-American woman leader in the House. Do you have anything you'd like to add to that, or your thoughts on that moment?
Well, she is, our paths crossed accidentally. She was looking to advance in her career, and a friend of hers referred her to me. And I hired her as my lawyer on my staff. And I don't think she had a plan to run for public office when she got here. I think she was thinking about running for a judge at some point in time. But the seat opened up, and we picked her, and she ran and she won. What I did not realize was her intellectual gifts combined with her heart, her compassion, and her faith have made her a unique person in the fact that she can deliver and orate concerns for our community in ways that people would not necessarily get. She's very gifted in that regard. But she's also very knowledgeable about the law because she's a lawyer and a really good lawyer. So she can approach issues in ways that you really can't prepare somebody for because she understands the law. So she really has exceeded any expectations that I had or most people had with regard to her service already. And of course, her being, the leader of the Democrats in the House is something that I don't think any of us expected to happen in such record time. Not just the fact that she is a woman, African-American, but she's young. And I think she's probably the youngest leader of the House in the history of the state. And so to say I'm proud is minor. To say I'm appreciative is probably more reflective of what I think of her service.
Yeah. So I'm actually going to share a quick photo before I transition into our discussion about the Black Caucus itself. Can you see that image I shared on your screen?
Yes, I can now.
Okay, this is from the 1984 session approximately.
Right,
I think you'll recognize a few members in there.
right.
What are your thoughts about some of these members? Does this spark any emotion or any stories that you can think of off the top of your head?
Well, the first thing is I know every one of them.
Yeah,
So that's the
good,
first thing that,
good.
it affects. And it was probably one of the earlier classes of the Black Caucus, but it wasn't the original grouping of the Black Caucus. This is probably, I'm looking, so Dwight is in there, Shaka's in there, Andrew Karn is in there. So these folks are not the original folks who started the Black Caucus.
Mhm.
This is probably the second wave. Leroy Irvis, of course, people know as the leader. But actually, my father, and there was another, maybe Mr. Irvis, I don't know, were the creators of the Black Caucus when they originally occurred. That was probably a class before this, if not a couple classes before this. So, and many of them, Dave Richardson, Shaka, Pete, the White, all were part of the independent political movement that occurred in Philadelphia. And they actually got trained with the organization that my father created and got elected office as a result of those things. And each one of those campaigns my father was involved
That's interesting.
in.
You mentioned your father was involved. Do you remember the year? I'm just trying to, we think the Black Caucus maybe started around 1973, around there. Does that
Around
sound?
the exact, yeah. So he
Okay,
got elected in 71,
okay.
I think, I can't remember. Yeah, so shortly thereafter, exactly.
I wrote it down.
Right.
He got elected to the House in 71, yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
Probably 73 is probably right. Yeah.
okay, all right, good. I just want to confirm that. All right, so I will put that down. All right, so moving to the Black Caucus itself, how are you involved in the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus in the past or currently?
Well, I'm a member
Mhm.
and have been ever since I was elected in the House. And knowledgeable of it because of my father. So before I served, I would come visit my father and, I would be able to sit in on some of the meetings. So I got to understand the substance of what it represented. And that was simply a gathering of African Americans to share their perspectives about legislative issues, either be the budget then or an approach going forward.
Mhm.
And familiar with each, if not all of the leadership folks that have been there ever since. I never pursued leading it. I'm not sure why, I just never did. But familiar with every chairman ever since it began. And it's, I don't know what's the right word, evolution, if you will, with regard to how it approaches issues in the House. They created a foundation. There was a spinoff for charitable support as a result that happened, I think, in the 80s or some point in time. So I've seen it grow
Mhm.
and I've seen it mature. I've also seen it become more aligned with the House of Representatives and the Senate to the extent that it's supported by those bodies through staffing and resources and the like. So I'm intimately familiar with its creation as well as its existence for a long time.
What do you think your father would say now, seeing how large the group has gotten over the last couple terms? What do you think he would think about it today?
He would always think about its impact,
Mhm.
not necessarily the size,
Mhm.
but is it having an impact upon the people that we represent? Is it a voice that resonates within the community of color? That's why it was created. Is it a messenger of hope and purpose? So I think that's probably what we think about.
Okay. Moving maybe outside of your district, do you still keep in touch with any former members who are no longer in the legislature that maybe didn't serve in your district?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You mean black and white or just black?
It could be anybody.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Stay in contact with folks like that all the time.
Okay.
They're either lobbying, advocating, or someone, some are just, how you doing?
Yeah.
not the same. So Shirley Kitchen, Larry Farnese, Dave Richardson when he was alive,
Yeah.
John White Jr., uh, Leanna Washington. There's a whole host of them I talk to on occasion.
I know the Philly delegation is very tight because a lot of these same members are mentioning the same group of people you are as well.
Yeah.
But what are some of the legislative issues the Black Caucus has had to work on in the past? And maybe what are some of the things you'd like to see in the future?
No, every social program that impacts Black folks, the caucus has reflected upon because it's either in the budget or the legislature. So I don't think there's a program that that affects economically challenged people that the Black Caucus has not been involved in, advocating for, standing up for, that advocating for the African American Chamber or a designee on the governor's board, not necessarily cabinet level, but involved in the governor's office. The creation of small business considerations for Black and brown businesses across Pennsylvania. Certainly the issue as it relates to prison reform, not judicial reform, currently is one that the caucus is significantly engaged in. COVID and its disproportionate impact upon healthcare delivery system, education, all those areas, because it's in the budget or because it's a policy or because it's the legislation, the caucus has been connected to in some shape, way, or form.
All right. So I have one final question. What is your advice for future members who have diverse backgrounds that are going to be running for offices in the legislature? What advice would you give them?
I'm sorry, was it? I didn't hear the whole thing.
That's okay. What advice would you give to future members who are going to run for the legislature that are from diverse backgrounds, so people of color, from Black communities, Latino communities, Asian communities? What would be your advice to them?
Keep it simple. Remember why you're there. And that is to make a difference, to push against the system, not necessarily acquiesce to the power of the system. Be very comfortable being uncomfortable. Acknowledge the fact that we're not the majority, but don't accept that we're the minority. Our voices should be equal and count the same as anybody else. And remember who we are fighting for. So that's what I would hope that they would do.
Okay, excellent.